The office day had barely begun, but for John, it was already shaping up to be an epic struggle. A battle not against deadlines or demanding clients, but against something far more sinister. The office air conditioner. John wasn't your typical office employee. He was scrawny, with glasses perpetually sliding down his nose and a wardrobe that seemed to consist entirely of oversized sweaters. Despite his frail appearance, John prided himself on being hardworking and dependable. But there was one thing he couldn't handle: cold temperatures. As he sat at his desk, bundled up in layers of clothing that made him look like he was preparing for a snowstorm rather than a day in the office, John stared at his laptop screen. The cursor blinked mockingly, waiting for him to type something, anything. But his fingers were too busy clutching the edges of his sweater to bother with work. "John, switch off the AC," Rahul, one of his colleagues, called out as he passed by. "You're probably freezing, while the rest of us are melting." John gave a weak smile, pulling his hands deeper into the sleeves of his sweater. "Rahul, it's not just freezing. It's giving me actual pain," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. "This AC is ruining my bones." Rahul chuckled, shaking his head. "Ruining your bones? You're not just the weakest guy in the office. You're like the poster child for fragility." John shot back with mock confidence. "Not weakest, bro. I'm the hypothermic hero of this office." The comment earned a laugh from Rahul, but John wasn't amused. Jokes aside, he knew his situation was no laughing matter. Every time the AC was turned on, or worse, when someone cranked up the fan speed, his body would react violently. His frail bones would ache, and he'd feel like he was being attacked by an invisible enemy. For John, the simplest things, like cold air, felt like a monstrous threat. Things took a turn for the dramatic when the manager's voice boomed through the office speakers. "Everyone, gather in the conference room for a quick meeting." John's heart sank. The conference room meant one thing: full-blast AC. He could already feel the chill crawling up his spine, even before stepping foot inside. This was going to be a disaster. Escalating conflict in the conference room. When John entered the conference room, he felt like he was walking into a freezer. The AC was blasting at full power, sending icy gusts of air swirling around the room. Everyone else seemed perfectly comfortable. Some were even fanning themselves with folders, but John immediately began shivering. He pulled his sweater tighter around himself and tried to focus on the meeting, but it was impossible. Every breath of cold air felt like needles piercing his skin. "All right, team," the manager began, pacing back and forth in front of the whiteboard. "We need to finalize the Q3 strategy by tomorrow. Let's brainstorm ideas." John raised his hand hesitantly. "Sir, can we, maybe lower the AC? It's a bit too cold in here." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to John, some amused, others annoyed. The manager frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "John, the AC is fine. If anything, it's keeping us alert. Now, let's focus on the task at hand." John sank back into his chair, defeated. He tried to concentrate, but the cold was unbearable. His teeth chattered, and his pen slipped out of his trembling fingers. One of his colleagues leaned over and whispered, "John, seriously, stop making excuses. No one else is complaining." That stung. John wanted to explain that his condition wasn't an excuse, it was real, but he knew no one would understand. Instead, he clenched his fists under the table and resolved to endure the meeting in silence. The breaking point. By the time the meeting ended, John was practically frozen solid. As everyone filed out of the room, chatting animatedly about their ideas, John lagged behind, rubbing his arms to generate some warmth. He decided then and there that enough was enough. He couldn't keep suffering in silence. It was time to take matters into his own hands. Later that afternoon, John approached the office admin, Priya, who was responsible for managing the office equipment. "Priya, can we talk about the AC settings?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Priya looked up from her computer, raising an eyebrow. "What about them? It's just, they're set way too low. It's affecting my health," John explained. "I've been getting headaches and joint pain because of the cold." Priya sighed. clearly unimpressed. John, the AC is set to standard office temperature. If we raise it, people will start complaining about the heat. You'll have to adjust. Frustrated but determined, John didn't give up. He decided to escalate the issue to HR. Surely, they would understand his plight and find a solution. HR meeting and unexpected support. The next day, John found himself sitting across from the HR manager, Mrs. Kapoor, explaining his situation. "Ma'am, I'm not asking for much," he said earnestly. "Just a slight adjustment to the AC temperature. Or maybe a personal heater for my desk. Anything to make it bearable." Mrs. Kapoor listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When John finished, she smiled kindly. "John, I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. While your request might seem unusual, we value employee comfort and well-being. Let me discuss this with the management and see what we can do." To John's surprise, Mrs. Kapoor followed through. She organized a small survey among the employees to gauge their preferences regarding office temperature. Much to everyone's astonishment, nearly half the staff admitted that they also found the AC too cold but hadn't spoken up because they assumed it was non-negotiable. Armed with this data, Mrs. Kapoor presented her findings to the senior management. After some deliberation, the company agreed to install individual climate controls in each section of the office, allowing employees to adjust the temperature according to their needs. Victory and reflection. When the new system was implemented, John felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time, he could sit at his desk without shivering uncontrollably. His colleagues, initially skeptical, soon realized the benefits of having control over their environment. Productivity soared, and morale improved. One evening, as John packed up to leave the office, Rahul stopped by his desk. "Hey, John," he said sheepishly. "I guess I owe you an apology. I didn't realize how tough it must have been for you. Thanks for standing up for yourself, and for all of us." John grinned, feeling a sense of pride wash over him. "No problem, Rahul. Sometimes, even the weakest heroes can make a difference." And with that, John walked out of the office, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with a little less chill and a lot more confidence. The daily struggle intensifies. Over the next few days, John's life became a series of small but exhausting battles. Every morning, he arrived at the office armed with layers upon layers of clothing, thermal wear under his shirt, a thick sweater on top, and even a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. His colleagues often joked that he looked like he was preparing for an Arctic expedition rather than a day in a corporate office. "John, are you auditioning for a role in Frozen?" quipped Mira, one of the marketing executives, as she passed by his desk. "Because Elsa called, and she wants her wardrobe back." John forced a smile, though inside, he felt a mix of embarrassment and irritation. He tried to laugh it off, saying, "Hey, if there's ever a blizzard in this office, I'll be the only one ready." But deep down, the constant teasing wore on him. It wasn't just about the jokes, it was the dismissive attitude. No one seemed to take his complaints seriously. To them, his sensitivity to cold was a punchline, not a legitimate issue. What they didn't realize was that every shiver sent waves of discomfort through his body, and every gust of icy air made it harder for him to focus on his work. Despite the challenges, John tried to push through. He reminded himself that he had responsibilities. He couldn't afford to let his condition affect his performance. But the harder he tried, the more impossible it seemed. His fingers would stiffen from the cold, making typing a slow and painful process. His joints ached so much that standing up from his chair required effort. And during meetings, he often found himself zoning out, too distracted by the relentless chill to pay attention. A clash in the break room. One afternoon, while grabbing a cup of coffee in the break room, John overheard a group of colleagues discussing the office environment. They were laughing about how perfect the AC settings were, claiming it kept them energized and focused. "I swear, if they turned off the AC, I'd fall asleep at my desk," said Arjun, one of the senior developers. "It's the only thing keeping me awake after those late-night coding marathons." John hesitated for a moment, then decided to speak up. "Not everyone feels the same way, you know?" he interjected, clutching his coffee mug tightly. Some of us actually find it too cold. The group turned to look at him, their expressions ranging from amusement to mild annoyance. Arjun smirked. "Oh, come on, John. You're exaggerating. It's not that cold." "It is for me," John replied firmly, his voice tinged with frustration. "Every time I sit in the conference room or near the vents, I feel like I'm freezing. It's affecting my health and my work." Another colleague, Neha, chimed in. "But John, we can't change the AC settings just because of one person. The majority of us are fine with it." "That's exactly the problem," John shot back, his tone rising slightly. "No one considers what happens to the minority. Just because most people aren't affected doesn't mean my experience isn't valid." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Arjun shrugged. "Look, man, maybe you should invest in a better jacket or something. This isn't really an office-wide issue." John clenched his fists, biting back a sharp retort. He knew arguing further wouldn't help. Instead, he muttered a quick, "Never mind," and walked out of the break room, leaving his half-finished coffee behind. The turning point, a heated debate. Later that week, tensions reached a boiling point during a team brainstorming session. The meeting was held in the same frigid conference room, and once again, John found himself struggling to stay warm. His teeth chattered audibly, drawing irritated glances from his teammates. "Can we please focus?" snapped the project lead, Anjali, glaring at John. "We don't have time for distractions." John flushed with embarrassment but couldn't stay quiet any longer. "I'm sorry, but this isn't just a distraction for me," he said, his voice trembling. "Not from cold this time, but from anger. The AC is literally unbearable. I've told HR, I've talked to the admin, and nothing has changed. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here freezing while everyone else pretends it's no big deal." Anjali sighed, clearly exasperated. "John, we've already discussed this. Adjusting the AC for one person isn't practical. You need to figure out a way to manage." Before John could respond, another teammate, Ravi, spoke up. "Actually, I think John has a point. I've noticed he's been struggling for weeks now. Maybe we should reconsider our stance." This sparked a heated debate among the team. Some sided with John, acknowledging that his discomfort was real and deserved attention. Others argued that catering to individual preferences would create chaos and disrupt productivity. As the argument grew louder, the manager, Mr. Sharma, stepped into the room. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his stern voice cutting through the noise. Everyone fell silent, turning to face him. Anjali quickly summarized the situation, emphasizing the impracticality of changing the AC settings for one employee. John, however, refused to back down. "Sir," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I understand that my request might seem inconvenient, but this isn't just about me being uncomfortable. It's about fairness. If someone had a medical condition triggered by heat, we'd accommodate them, right? Why is it different for cold?" Mr. Sharma frowned, clearly caught off guard by John's passionate plea. After a long pause, he said, "All right, let's table this discussion for now. John, I'll meet with HR and see if there's a feasible solution. But until then, let's try to keep things professional." A glimmer of hope. Though the meeting ended without a resolution, John felt a flicker of hope. For the first time, someone in authority had acknowledged his concerns. Over the next few days, whispers spread throughout the office about John's confrontation with management. While some colleagues still teased him, others began to empathize with his plight. One evening, as John packed up to leave, Ravi approached him. "Hey, John," he said, looking slightly sheepish. "I wanted to say, I think you handled that meeting really well. You stood your ground, and honestly, it made me rethink how we treat each other's needs in the office." John smiled, feeling a sense of vindication. "Thanks, Ravi. That means a lot." As he walked out of the office, John realized that his fight wasn't just about the AC. It was about proving that even the weakest voices deserve to be heard. And little did he know, his persistence was about to spark a change that would benefit everyone. The HR meeting, a turning point. The following Monday, John received an email from HR requesting a formal meeting to discuss his concerns. Though nervous, he felt a sense of determination as he walked into the conference room where Mrs. Kapoor, the HR manager, was waiting along with Mr. Sharma, the office manager. "John," Mrs. Kapoor began warmly, "we appreciate you bringing this matter to our attention. We've reviewed your situation and discussed it with senior management. While your request initially seemed challenging to accommodate, we believe there's merit in exploring solutions that balance individual needs with overall office comfort." John nodded, grateful for her understanding. "Thank you for considering my perspective, ma'am. I just want to ensure that everyone feels comfortable and productive in the workplace." Mr. Sharma leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "We've decided to conduct a survey among employees to better understand their preferences regarding office temperature. Additionally, we're exploring options like adjustable climate controls or personal heaters for those who need them." John's eyes lit up with hope. "That sounds amazing, sir. I truly think it'll make a huge difference, not just for me, but for others too." Mrs. Kapoor smiled. "Exactly. Your advocacy has reminded us of the importance of inclusivity. Sometimes, what seems like a minor issue to one person can be a significant challenge for another." With that, the meeting concluded on a positive note. John left the room feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he wouldn't have to dread coming to work because of the cold. The survey results. A surprising revelation. A week later, HR released the results of the employee survey, and they were eye-opening. To everyone's surprise, nearly half the staff admitted that they found the AC too cold but hadn't spoken up because they assumed it was non-negotiable. Some even confessed that they layered up discreetly, just like John, while others simply endured the discomfort in silence. When these findings were shared during a company-wide meeting, murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. Even those who had previously dismissed John's complaints now realized that the issue wasn't as isolated as they thought. "This data shows us that we need to rethink our approach to workplace comfort," Mrs. Kapoor announced. "Starting next month, we'll be installing adjustable climate controls in each section of the office. Employees will have the flexibility to set temperatures according to their needs within a reasonable range." Applause broke out across the room, and John couldn't help but grin. His persistence had sparked a change that benefited not just him, but the entire team. A newfound confidence. As the days passed, John noticed a shift in how his colleagues treated him. The teasing stopped, replaced by genuine respect. People began approaching him to thank him for speaking up, admitting that they too had struggled with the AC, but never had the courage to say anything. One afternoon, Rahul, the same colleague who had once joked about John auditioning for Frozen, stopped by his desk. "Hey, John," he said sheepishly. "I owe you an apology. I didn't realize how tough it must have been for you. Thanks for standing up for yourself, and for all of us." John chuckled, shaking his head. "No problem, Rahul. Honestly, I didn't expect this kind of outcome. I just wanted to be heard." "Well, you definitely made a difference," Rahul replied with a smile before walking away. For John, this moment marked a turning point, not just in his professional life, but in his personal growth as well. He had always seen himself as the weakest link, someone who faded into the background. But now, he realized that strength wasn't about physical endurance or loud confidence. It was about having the courage to speak up when it mattered most. The final test, adjustments in action. When the new climate control system was installed, John eagerly tested it out. Sitting at his desk, he adjusted the temperature to a level that felt comfortable for the first time in months. Gone were the shivers, the aches, and the endless layers of clothing. He could finally focus on his work without distraction. During lunch breaks, he noticed other colleagues doing the same, some lowering the temperature slightly, others raising it. The office buzzed with conversations about how much more pleasant the environment had become. Productivity soared, and morale improved noticeably. Even Mr. Sharma acknowledged the positive impact during a follow-up meeting. "Thanks to John's initiative, we've created a workspace that caters to everyone's needs," he said. "It's proof that listening to feedback, even unconventional requests, can lead to meaningful improvements. John sat quietly in the corner, a small but proud smile playing on his lips. He hadn't set out to be a hero, but somehow he had become one. A quiet triumph. Weeks turned into months, and the office settled into its new rhythm. The adjustable climate controls had transformed the workspace into a more comfortable and harmonious environment. Employees no longer huddled in sweaters or fanned themselves with folders. They simply adjusted their settings and got on with their day. It was a small change, but it made a world of difference. For John, the transformation went beyond physical comfort. He carried himself differently now, with his head held higher and a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Gone was the timid man who shrank at every teasing remark or dismissive comment. In his place stood someone who knew the value of speaking up, even when it felt daunting. One evening, as he packed up to leave the office, Mira stopped by his desk. "Hey, John," she said with a grin. "You know, I think we should nominate you for Employee of the Month." John laughed, shaking his head. "Why? All I did was complain about the AC." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Are you kidding? You didn't just complain, you sparked a movement. Look around. Everyone's happier because of what you did." Her words stayed with him as he walked home that night. The streets were alive with the hum of city life, but John barely noticed. His mind was replaying the events of the past few months, the struggles, the arguments, the victories. What started as a personal battle against the cold had evolved into something much bigger. A reminder that every voice matters, no matter how small it may seem. Reflection. Strength in vulnerability. That weekend, John spent some time reflecting on his journey. He thought about the moments when he'd felt weakest, the shivers, the aches, the embarrassment, and realized they had shaped him in ways he never expected. By embracing his vulnerability and refusing to stay silent, he had discovered a strength he didn't know he possessed. He also thought about the people who had doubted him, the colleagues who teased him, the managers who dismissed him, and how their attitudes had shifted over time. It wasn't anger or resentment he felt toward them. It was gratitude. Their initial skepticism had forced him to dig deeper, to articulate his needs clearly and persistently. Without that resistance, he might not have grown as much as he had. Most importantly, he reflected on the lesson he'd learned. True strength lies not in overpowering others, but in standing firm in your truth, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. And sometimes, the smallest acts of courage can create ripples that touch countless lives. The legacy of a hypothermic hero. On Monday morning, as John entered the office, he noticed a poster hanging near the entrance. It featured a cartoonish illustration of a superhero wrapped in a scarf, battling gusts of icy wind. Beneath it, bold letters read, "The weakest office hero, how John fought the AC and won." His colleagues erupted into applause as soon as they saw his reaction. Someone had created the poster as a lighthearted tribute to his efforts, and it quickly became a talking point in the office. While John initially felt embarrassed, he couldn't help but laugh along with everyone else. The nickname Hypothermic Hero had stuck, but now it carried a sense of pride rather than mockery. Later that day, Mrs. Kapoor called him into her office. "John," she began with a warm smile, "I wanted to personally thank you for everything you've done. Your advocacy has reminded us of the importance of listening to employees' concerns, no matter how unconventional they may seem." John nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. Honestly, I didn't expect this kind of outcome. I just wanted to be heard." "Well, you've inspired all of us," she replied, "and I hope your story encourages others to speak up too." Closing thoughts. A lasting impact. As the weeks passed, John continued to thrive in his role. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was excelling. With the added comfort of a supportive work environment, he found himself taking on new challenges and contributing ideas he'd once hesitated to share. His colleagues noticed the change and often joked that the hypothermic hero had become an unstoppable force. But John knew the real victory wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about proving to himself and to others that even the weakest voices deserve to be heard. That standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. And that sometimes the smallest battles can lead to the biggest wins. One chilly evening, as he sat at his desk finishing up a report, John glanced at the thermostat beside him. It displayed a cozy 22 degrees Celsius, a temperature he had fought hard to achieve. Smiling to himself, he whispered softly, "Even the weakest heroes can make a difference." The end.